Shabbat Shalom. All right, I need a quick show of hands. Option A. You are heading out to a new country. You are going to visit there. You are a, dare I say, tourist. Do you, option A, bring along the best guidebook you can possibly find? Maybe even hire a private guide when you get to that place. Sign up for the tours to make sure that someone will be showing you all of the highlights, the things that you just can't miss if you go to that place. Or, option B, do you wing it? You figure, you know what, the people live in this country. They seem to get by just fine without a guidebook 24/7. They don't need a tour guide to lead them from point A to point B. I'll go and I'll see what the country is like without the filter of a guidebook's recommendations or some tour guide's continual monologue and narrative droning on and on over the loudspeaker of the bus. So, option A, who's for the tour book and the tours? Option B, who's for winging it, seeing what life is really like? You know, that's almost exactly 50-50. What an interesting split that we've got in this group. I personally am a 50-50 kind of guy. Just for my own disclosure, when I go to a new place, I like to read the guidebook in advance. I like to look out and see what are the highlights. And I do like someone to fill me in on some of the things that I might otherwise miss. But I never pack the schedule so tight that there isn't room for just wandering and serendipity to be able to explore what the place is like when you're there. Well, have we got some wandering and serendipity in this week's Torah portion? That I must warn you, without a guide, you will not only be lost, you may be alarmed. We are in chapter 21 of the book of Vayikra. People have long ago given up reading along with the weekly portion because the narrative stopped ages ago. And that means many people are unaware of some of the shocking passages found in the Torah. These are the passages that those that are anti-theists, those that hate religion, like to trot out to try and shame us and show us, you don't even know what your holy book says. Well, I would like to inoculate you against that, as well as be your guide through the more difficult neighborhoods of the Torah. Area number one that you need to look out on the right-hand window of the tour bus is the topic of the Kohanim. Now, the Kohanim, the priests, this is not so surprising. Most of us are familiar with that idea. We have to know at least one Mr. Cohen or Mr. Khan or Mr. Kaplan. If you come to shul regularly, you definitely know at least a couple of those folks. But it goes on to talk about some of the requirements that a Kohen must follow. Certain limitations on their mourning practices in order to maintain ritual purity. But then it gets interesting. There are limits beyond those normal limits for the rest of us for a Kohen on who he can marry. And the word that is used in particular is the Kohen is not allowed to marry a zonah. Now, this word is a landmine, because as soon as I try to translate this into English, it all just falls apart. Because this word, and you can cover small ears if you like in the room, can be variously translated as a woman of promiscuity, or a woman of easy or virtue for hire, or somebody that, engages in all sorts of acts for the right sort of customers. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a zonah. Okay, well, maybe you're thinking, well, that makes sense. After all, he's going to be a priest. We need to make sure that he has the right sort of family, etc. Except the problem is, you're not looking in your guidebook. In the guidebook, it actually unpacks this word zonah, and it says, do not think that the word zonah here means the same as it means in other places. That just like in English, this word can mean different things. Think of all of the various English words that might be used for a similar type of category of person, and how sometimes it can be used as a criminal charge, sometimes it can be used as a base insult, sometimes it can be used in a somewhat non-derogatory term that isn't even related to intimacy. If you want more examples of that, I'll be happy to give them later when we're off the mic. And in Hebrew too, say our rabbis, this word zonah does not mean any of those other definitions that we talked about. Here, zonah has a very technical, legal definition, meaning this is a woman who has had a relationship with a man that she could never marry. Now, that's not just saying premarital intimacy. Not that the Torah is exactly a huge fan of this, but it does not have nearly the same stigma as it does in some other conditions and communities. But specifically here, if she has engaged in a relationship of intimacy with someone who could never become her husband, meaning it is a forbidden relationship, for example, a close relative, then even with that relationship having ended, she is no longer eligible to marry into the Kohanic family, to become part of the Kohanes. All right, that's a little bit more limited, a little bit sharper. Thank you, tour guide, for explaining what I'm seeing off on the right. I understand it a little bit better. And on your left is the burning of the Kohanes' daughters. I'm sorry, what? Well, yes. You see, if it turns out that one of the Kohanes' daughters behaves as a zonah, then she will be burnt to death. Now, I am sure that when I said those phrases, burnt to death, the immediate thing that pops into your head is something like the Salem witch trials. Because we have learned nothing from movies and pop culture, if not, when you burn someone to death, it means tying them to a stick and piling a bunch of wood around their feet and lighting it and then sitting back and saying, boo, while they die. Well, first of all, that is not how burning someone to death works under Jewish law. And second of all, what exactly is the crime that she committed? Well, as your tour guide, I will point out that here again, the term zonah has a technical definition, which is not only different from all of those insulting slang-type words we might use for a woman, but is even different from the last category of zonah, only right above it in the Torah. This zonah is somebody that has actually committed adultery. You see, the rabbis understood that the Torah could not be describing a capital crime for a capital punishment for a non-capital crime. And as they know, simply being intimate with somebody that is not your husband is not a capital offense, provided you're not married yet at all. If you are married, well, we have a word for that. It's called adultery. And with rigorous evidentiary rules, adultery can be a capital crime under Jewish law. Think about that. It's a rather important concept to hold in mind. But for the Kohanim, this zonah is an adulteress. The only difference between her and any other adulteress is the form of punishment, that she will be killed with this burning, which involved a near instantaneous application of heat in a way that would render her dead instantly rather than tied to a stake for some Hollywood things. But adultery was a crime for anyone. There was a slight change on how she would be punished because of the status within the Kohanic family, but that she would be punished and the crime for which she would be punished is no different than it would be for anyone else. If she has committed adultery, then like anyone else, she will also be executed. As I said, there are very high evidentiary standards before such an execution can take place. Usually, suspected adultery would simply end in divorce, but she would not be treated very differently than any other. Her punishment would not be worse, nor would it be better, not having privilege from her station, nor being given a more severe treatment or suffering in that case. Now, you might still be feeling a little uneasy about this whole thing. Execution for adultery? Okay, fine, it's not just for the Kohanim, but then for the rest of us, that doesn't necessarily make me feel better. The idea that the Torah cares about who we marry and the relationships that we have and whether we are trying to bring sanctity into our lives, well, that doesn't seem very 21st century. That's why we need tour guides. Not to point out things that we know we're going to love. Not to point out, there is the beautiful monument and here is the wonderful piece of nature. But to point out the things that we might avoid looking at and avoid asking questions about and avoid investigating to their full depth. We might stumble across them and then be repulsed because we didn't understand the details, and hopefully I've given you at least a hint that there is more depth to this than the surface might intimate. But more importantly, it forces us to ask questions. What does it mean to live in a sanctified relationship with another person? What does it mean when we try to establish a community that cares about how we treat each other, not only in public, but how spouses will treat each other in private. What are our obligations to finding justice as well as peace within a community? And how is that navigated? When we look through the tour guide, the tour books of the rabbis, the midrashim, the halakha, we recognize that it is much more complicated and nuanced, and by and large more humane than our own knee-jerk reaction would be if we were to read those texts on our own. This is not only important for us to understand in order to inoculate us against others that would misuse or misquote our texts at us, but also so that we will seek to find our way through the Torah, embrace all that it has to teach, and wrestle with it until we can move to the next level. Never being completely satisfied, God forbid ever feeling completely comfortable in our understanding or appreciation of its depths and nuances. Always finding something more that we need to just understand a bit more with the right tour. Shabbat Shalom.